In October of 1955, 9 coal miners descended into the depths of the Carrick No. 2 mine in the hills of Fayette County, Pennsylvania, and never came back up. At 11:40 that night, the ground shuddered. The portal fell. The company said no one could reach them. The state agreed. The mine was sealed with all 9 inside, and the little patch town of Duncarrick learned to live around a hole in the ground. For 50 years. That was the whole story. Then, in March of 2005, a homeowner reported cracks in her foundation. A state inspector opened a vent bore into the old workings. Routine work, one of 40 sealed sites in her district. She lowered a light into the dark. Coffins, rows of them, laid out with walking space between, running past the edge of the light in both directions. No rescue ever reached these men. No recovery was ever made. Every record in Pennsylvania says the 9 are still lying where they fell. Dead men don't bury themselves. Someone came back to Carrick No. 2, knew the way in, took their time, sealed the door behind them. What that inspector found in the dark would force open a case 50 years of paperwork was built to keep shut, and prove that the men who sealed this mine buried more than the dead. There is not much left of Duncarrick, Pennsylvania, a double row of company houses along a creek that runs orange when it rains, a Slovak church with a padlocked door, a war memorial, and beside it, a granite slab with 9 names and 1 date, October 28, 1955. The people who still live here are mostly old. They park their cars over ground that is hollow underneath, and they know it. Everyone in Fayette County lives on top of somebody's old mine. It is the price of the place. Most of the time, the ground keeps the bargain. In March of 2005 on 3rd Street, it stopped. The complaint comes into the state's Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation on a Tuesday. A widow named Ference, 79 years old, cracks running up her cellar wall like veins, her back door jammed shut in its frame. The house has stood since 1921. The Bureau assigns the file the way it assigns every file in that district. It goes to Nora Rennick. Rennick is 34. She is a project inspector, mine maps, subsidence claims, gas venting, the slow custodial work of a county that produced coal for 100 years and has been paying for it ever since. She carries 40 sealed mines in her district portfolio. She grew up 20 minutes from Duncarrick in Perryopolis, and like everyone who grew up there, she knows what the granite slab beside the war memorial is for. She knows it better than most. The 9th name on it is her grandfather's. Andrew Rennick was 31 years old when he rode the cage down into Carrick No. 2 for the night shift, and the portal came down behind him. Nora's father was 6. What Nora has of her grandfather is 1 photograph, a lean man squinting on a porch step, and the particular silence her father builds around the subject, a silence with walls and a roof on it. The family learned to live next to it. In Fayette County, that is a common architecture. So when the Ference file lands on her desk with the words Carrick No. 2 workings printed in the location field, Nora does not feel anything dramatic. It is one of her 40 holes. She has driven past its sealed portal 100 times. She pulls the mine's folder from the map room the way she would pull any other. The folder is thin, a seam map from 1948 on cracked linen, an accident bulletin from November 1955, and the final abandonment map filed in 1961, certified, stamped, signed, the official drawing of everything under Duncarrick. She notes the east gallery runs beneath 3rd Street at a depth of about 200 feet, marked Worked Out, Standard. If the roof of that gallery is failing after 50 years, the widow's cracked cellar is exactly what it looks like from above. The fix starts with a hole. Before the state spends money filling a void, someone has to look inside it. That is the job. Drill a 6-inch borehole down into the old workings, lower a camera, see what 50 years of dark has done. Nothing about it goes smoothly because nothing in this work ever does. The drill crew spuds in on a Thursday and spends most of a day grinding through sandstone the old map said was thinner than it is. At 190 feet, they should punch through into the gallery. They don't. They find rock where the certified map shows open entry. The map is wrong. Old maps often are. Nora reshoots the survey off a different datum, moves the rig 60 feet west, and they start again. It costs 3 days and a chunk of her quarter's budget. She writes it up the way she writes everything up. On the second attempt, at 204 feet, the drill string drops. Open void. The crew cases the hole, and Nora runs the gas meter over it. Low oxygen, as expected, nothing explosive. Then they rig the downhole camera, a light, and a lens on 250 feet of cable, and Nora sits in the truck with a small gray monitor on her knees and sends it down. This part she has done more times than she can count. She knows what sealed mines look like inside. Standing water, usually, roof falls, rusted rail, timber props gone soft as sponge. A darkness that has not been interrupted since before she was born. The camera clears the casing. The light finds the gallery floor. The floor is dry. That is the first wrong thing. 50 years, and the east gallery is dry as a cellar shelf. The second wrong thing is that the floor is not empty. The light moves across it in a slow cone, and inside the cone there are shapes. Long, low, regular. Set out in rows with walking space between them, row after row, running past the edge of the light in both directions. For a few seconds, Nora reads them as equipment. Supply crates, maybe, left from the working days. Then the camera steadies and the shapes resolve, and she stops thinking about equipment. They are coffins. Steel burial cases, gray with rock dust, lids shut, laid out on the gallery floor 200 feet under a widow's cracked foundation. She counts the ones the light can reach. 6. She pans the camera. 3 more at the edge of the dark. 9. Nora Rennick has spent 11 years inside the paperwork of dead mines, and she knows the record on this one cold, the way you know a thing that belongs to your own family. Carrick No. 2 was sealed with the men inside. No rescue reached them. No recovery was ever attempted. The state closed the file in 1955 on 9 miners left where they fell. That is the phrase in the accident bulletin. That is the sentence her family was handed instead of a body. There is no version of that story with coffins in it. Coffins mean hands. Coffins mean somebody ordered steel burial cases and carried them into a sealed mine and did slow, deliberate, careful work in the dark, and then walked out and said nothing and let the granite slab up top go on telling it wrong. Her first thought is not grief. Grief would make sense later. Her first thought is an inspector's thought, flat and procedural, and it will stay with her for the rest of her life. The paperwork doesn't allow this. She zooms the camera on the nearest case. The dust on the lid has settled thick, but the stencil under it still holds. Block letters, white paint, the way a company marks its property, a surname, and a single initial. She reads it twice because the first time her mind refuses to do the work. The name on the coffin is Rennick. The initial stands for Andrew. She is looking at her grandfather. Within a week, Carrick No. 2 belongs to everyone except Nora Rennick. That is not cruelty. It is procedure, and she would have written the same memo herself. The moment the remains in the East Gallery are confirmed as the 1955 crew, and the moment the state cross-references the recovery roster against the personnel file of the inspector who found them, Nora is off the site. Conflict of interest. A project manager named DeLuca takes over, a decent man who keeps apologizing to her in doorways. The coroner's office takes custody of the gallery. The state police open a file, because coffins in a sealed mine are a crime scene until someone proves otherwise, even if every suspect has been dead for decades. Nora is given administrative tasks in an office 40 minutes away. She is also given, without anyone quite saying so, the role she will hold for the rest of this story. Next of kin. To understand what the coffins broke, you have to understand the story they broke, the one Fayette County had lived with, intact, for 50 years. It went like this. On the night of October 28, 1955, 17 men were underground at Carrick No. 2, a small drift mine working leased coal for Greaves Coal and Coke. At 11:40, a section of roof came down along the main haulage entry. Not an explosion, no fire, just the mountain shifting its weight the way it sometimes does. 8 men out by the fall reached the surface. 9 men in by it did not. The rescue effort lasted 3 days on paper. The fall was long, better than 200 feet of collapsed entry, still working, still dropping rock. The company brought in crews from 2 neighboring operations. On the second day, a state district mine inspector named Roy Callum arrived from Uniontown, walked the ground, and concurred with the operator's engineer. The fall was unstable, the air beyond it was almost certainly dead, and continued digging risked the rescuers without meaningful hope for the trapped. On the third day, with a gas reading at the fall face they said proved the atmosphere and by was unsurvivable, the effort was called. The mine was sealed in the first week of November, 1955. The state's accident bulletin closed the file on 9 men left where they fell. The families were given the phrase a settlement of $1,100 each from an operator already sliding toward insolvency and a granite slab. Duncarrick did what patch towns do. It absorbed the thing it could not change. Greaves Coal and Coke wound down its last lease in the 60s and dissolved. Walter Greaves died in 1974 and is buried in Connellsville under a modest stone. The men who sealed the mine grew old around the people whose fathers were inside it, and the story held because there was nothing to push against it. Now there is a gallery full of steel coffins, and the story is bleeding from a wound nobody can find yet. The county lets Nora keep one thing: the paper. Nobody can take the paper from her because the paper is public and because half of it already lives in the map room she has worked out of for 11 years. So while DeLuca's crew engineers a proper opening into the East Gallery, Nora does the only thing left to her. She starts reading the file of her own family's disaster, really reading it for the first time in her life with an inspector's eyes instead of a granddaughter's. She builds the roster first. 9 index cards on her kitchen table. Andrew Rennick, 31, her grandfather, Steve Mihalik, 40, John Andrus, 26, and his brother Michael, 24, who had worked side by side and stayed that way. Frank Belandi, 44, the shot firer. George Toth, 51, oldest man on the shift. Chester Coverley, 35, Bill Harding, 28, and Paul Kessler, 19 years old, 4 months in the mine, whose mother reportedly stood at the portal every day of the rescue and had to be led home when they called it. 9 men, 16 children among them, her father one of them. Her father is 56 now, a retired machinist with 2 knee replacements, and when she drives to his house in Perryopolis to tell him about the coffins before the state can, he does something she has never seen him do in her life. He asks her to stop. Not to stop grieving, not to stop the state. He understands no one can, but to stop her part. Let the coroner do the identifications, sign the forms, take the remains when they're released, and put his father in the churchyard where his mother wanted him in the first place, and let that be the end of it. You found him, her father says. That's more than we ever thought we'd get. Leave the rest in the ground. She asks him what the rest is. He looks at her for a long moment on his own porch with his coffee going cold. And Nora watches her father, a blunt and practical man, do the thing his whole generation in that county learned to do. She watches him close. It was 50 years ago, he says. Everyone who did anything is dead. Whatever you dig up now lands on the living. He goes inside. The conversation is over, and Nora is left standing on the porch with a fact she cannot file. Her father, who was 6 years old that October, is not indifferent to what happened at Carrick No. 2. He is afraid of it. The break, when it comes, does not come from the paper. It comes from a funeral director. Bosco and Son has buried Duncarrick's dead since 1930, and the current Bosco, third of the name, calls the Bureau with a question about remains transport, gets shunted around, and ends up off the record with Nora, because in a small county everything ends up with somebody's phone number. In the course of the call, he mentions, almost idly, that his grandfather's ledgers run back to the 40s, that everything the firm ever handled is in the basement in canvas-bound books, and that if the state needs casket records for the identifications. Nora stops him. Casket records. Well, Bosco says, somebody made those cases. Steel burial cases don't come from nowhere. If they were bought anywhere in this valley, there's paper on them somewhere. It is the first door. It is also, though she does not know it yet, the smaller of the two things that phone call gives her. Because when she drives down to look at the ledgers, in the basement of the funeral home, she meets a man sitting in the office upstairs, old straight-backed, cap on his knee. He has come to prearrange his own funeral, the way old men in coal towns do, practically without drama. Bosco introduces him. Emil Hruska, 81 years old. Duncarrick, born and raised. Surface crew, Carrick No. 2, October 1955. Hruska looks at her for a while when he hears the name Rennick. Then he says the thing he has apparently decided, somewhere in 50 years of Sundays, that he would say if any of the nine's blood ever stood in front of him and asked. Except she hasn't asked anything yet. That is what she will remember about it. She hasn't asked him a single question, and Emil Hruska sets his cap on the desk and looks at his hands and says, "That fan ran too long." The casket ledgers are a dead end. Nora spends 2 evenings in the basement of Bosco and Son with 50 years of canvas-bound books and finds exactly what the careful part of her expected. Nothing. Bosco and Son never handled the 9. No steel burial cases were bought through any funeral home in the lower end of the county in 1955 or any year near it. Bosco's grandfather kept records like a customs house, and the records are silent. Whoever bought 9 steel cases did not buy them here, and did not buy them as funeral goods. She writes it down anyway. 11 years of state work has taught her that a clean absence is still evidence. It just doesn't tell you what of yet. Emil Hruska is not a dead end. He is something more frustrating, a door that opens 1 inch at a time. She visits him twice that week at his kitchen table in Duncarrick, 3 blocks from the portal he worked at as a young man. He is sharp, precise about some things, foggy about others, and, she comes to understand, not foggy at all about the things he claims to be foggy about. 50 years of silence has a grammar to it. He answers what he decides to answer. What he gives her the first visit is this: the rescue was real. He wants that understood before anything else. Those first 2 days, nobody on that surface was pretending. Men clawed at the fall in shifts until their hands bled through their gloves, and Walter Greaves stood at the portal mouth the whole first night in his good coat, and it was not theater. People will want it simple now, Hruska says. It wasn't simple. Then the state inspector came from Uniontown, and there was a meeting in the lamp house with the door shut, Greaves, the inspector, and the day shift foreman. And after the meeting, the digging slowed, and on the 3rd day, it stopped. There was a gas reading at the fall face. Numbers were read out to the families as proof the heir in-by was dead. Hruska was standing close enough to hear the numbers. "And?" Nora asks. "And I was a fanman's helper before I was anything else," Hruska says. He turns his coffee cup a quarter turn, and that is all the editorializing he permits himself for the entire visit. You go look at what the fan was doing. Fan doesn't know how to lie. The fan. Every drift mine of that era breathed through one, a main exhaust fan, pushing air through the workings on a circuit, running day and night, its records kept the way the law required, because ventilation was the one thing Pennsylvania had learned at the cost of a few thousand dead men, never to leave to memory. A fan house log, date, water gauge reading, hours run, initials of the man who checked it. The most boring document a mine produces. Boring documents are Nora Rennick's native language. Here is where being barred from her own case stops mattering, because none of what she needs next is behind the state police tape. When Greaves Coal and Coke dissolved in 1968, its remaining records went where dead companies' records go. A courthouse box here, a state transfer there. The abandonment file for Carrick No. 2 lives with the department that inherited the old Bureau of Mines paper. She has requested that file 100 times in her career for 100 ordinary reasons. Nobody thinks anything of Inspector Rennick pulling dissolution-era records. She is careful just the same. She requests 4 defunct operators' files at once, Greaves Coal third in the stack. The box, when it comes, smells like every records box, dust and cold paper. Seam maps, royalty statements to the land company, correspondence about a pump. The 1955 accident bulletin she has already memorized. And near the bottom, in a folder marked Maintenance, Ventilation, a canvas-covered ledger with a broken string tie. The fan house log for Carrick No. 2. It survived for the stupidest and most human of reasons. It looks like nothing. No one weeding a dead company's file in 1968 read a column of water gauge readings as a confession. It was maintenance. It was kept because throwing out state-mandated records was more trouble than boxing them. Nora opens it on a records room table and reads it like an inspector, front to back, October 1st onward, letting it be boring for as long as it can. October 28th, readings at 6 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. Normal. That night the mountain came down. October 29th, 30th, 31st. The fan runs. Of course it does. The rescue is underway. Men are at the fall. Air matters. Readings twice a day, in a tight, careful hand, initialed in the right-hand column. October 31st is the day the rescue was called, the day the families were read the gas numbers, the day the state's own bulletin says the air beyond the fall was declared unsurvivable, and 9 men were formally left where they fell. November 1st, the fan runs. November 2nd, the fan runs. This is the day. She pulls the accident bulletin and sets it beside the ledger to be sure. This is the day the seal was certified complete. The mine is closed. Officially, there is nothing on the other side of that concrete but a tomb. November 3rd, the fan runs. November 4th, November 5th. Readings twice a day. Water gauge steady. Initials in the column, the same initials, day after day. Nora sits back from the table and makes herself say the engineering out loud, quietly, in an empty records room, because it is the kind of fact you have to hear in a voice to believe. You do not ventilate a tomb. A fan is not a light left on by accident. It is a machine the size of a truck bed that costs real money every hour it turns, run by a company that was counting nickels, and its entire purpose, its only purpose, is to deliver breathable air to the far end of a mine. Air for the dead is not a mercy anyone pays the power company for. If the fan is running, it is running for someone. And whoever kept this log walked to the fan house twice a day, passed the new seal, passed the granite slab grief of an entire town, and wrote down the proof in the state's own required format. The gas reading read aloud to the families was the lie. The fan log is the truth, kept in duplicate columns by the lie's own bookkeeper. Her grandfather did not die on October 28, 1955. On October 28th, her grandfather was barricaded in the East Gallery with 8 other men in workable air, waiting, because a barricade is what miners are trained to build, and waiting is what the training is for, while his 6-year-old son was being told he was dead, while the seal was poured, while the county began to grieve. The men of Carrick No. 2 were alive behind the fall, and the fan turned day and night to keep them that way, and the man who ordered it sealed knew so thoroughly, so operationally, that he kept the air going and the records current. She checks one more thing that night because she is her job before she is anything else, and the job says, corroborate. 50-year-old utility accounts are a nightmare, but a dissolution file keeps its unpaid bills, and there it is in the creditor schedules. Electric service, fan house account, Carrick No. 2. Billed load running clean through the first week of November 1955. The power company, with no idea what it was writing down, kept the second copy of the truth. 2 documents. Neither knows about the other. Both count the same days. Then she turns to the last page of the fan log because she has been avoiding it, and she knows she has been avoiding it, and an inspector finishes the file. November 8, 1955. Morning reading, normal, initialed. Afternoon line, and the hand, the same hand as every other line, tight and careful, writes 3 words. Fan off, complete. 11 days after the collapse, 6 days after the town was told the mine was a grave, somebody stood in that fan house and shut off the air to 9 living men and initialed it. 2 letters, right-hand column, same as every day before. DK. DK is not a mystery, and Nora does not treat it as one. The initials are in the accident bulletin she has known by heart for weeks. Day shift foreman, Carrick No. 2, Dale Kettering. In the lamp house meeting with the door shut, Hruska had said, Greaves, the inspector, and the day shift foreman. Kettering was the third man in that room. Kettering's hand kept the fan log, twice a day, 11 days, in the same tight, careful script. Kettering's hand wrote, "Fan off," complete. He died in 1991. He is buried in Dawson, 4 miles from the portal, and for 36 years after that November morning, he lived in the valley, coached a Little League team, and stood at the back of St. Cyril's at every funeral Duncarrick held, including, the parish record shows, every single one ever held for a family of the 9. Nora finds that last fact in the church's own guest books, and it stops her for a full evening. She does not know yet what it means. She writes it down and leaves it open because the file is teaching her that in this story, attendance is testimony. Meanwhile, 40 minutes away, the East Gallery has been giving up its own account, and Nora receives it the only way she now can, in a conference room as next of kin, in the state's careful language, with DeLuca sliding briefing summaries across the table and apologizing with his eyebrows. The gallery says this: the 9 were found in 9 steel burial cases of a commercial pattern, arranged in 3 rows. The remains had been placed in the cases with evident care, each man laid straight, arms composed. With them, sealed in, were personal effects: boots, belt buckles, 2 pocket watches, a rosary, and the artifacts of the barricade itself, gathered and placed alongside the men as if someone had understood they belonged together. But it is the hardware, not the men, that breaks the case open, because hardware is dated the way grief never is. The cases are steel, and steel is paperwork. The coroner's forensic contractor traces the pattern and the maker's stamps. A burial case design not manufactured before 1959. The mortar repointing the inner seal, visible the moment DeLuca's crew cut through, sets chemically like a Portland blend that reads as 1960s work, laid neatly over the original 1955 pour. There is a rock dust film on the coffin lids, and beneath the coffins, none. The cases were set down on a swept floor. Someone cleaned the gallery before they furnished it. And along the haulage entry, where the 1955 fall had been, the state's engineers find the fall cribbed, timbered through, a passage opened in the collapse, and shored with cut lumber, the sawmill stamps on it post-war commercial stock, and then the whole passage deliberately dropped again behind them on the way out. The picture assembles itself with a kind of horrible administrative calm, and Nora watches the investigators arrive, briefing by briefing, at the place she has already been living for weeks. Nobody broke into a tomb. Somebody came back through a door they knew, years after 1955, with lumber and mortar and 9 steel burial cases, and spent, the engineer's estimate, no less than several weeks underground. They timbered through 200 feet of fall. They found the barricade in the East Gallery and what the 11 days had left behind it. They laid 9 men out with care that bordered on ceremony on a floor they swept first. Then they backed out, collapsed the passage behind them, remortared the seal so cleanly that 50 years of inspections never looked twice at it, and returned the mine to its official silence. The question is no longer who died, or when, or how. The question is, what could possibly force men who had gotten away with it to go back? Nora finds the answer where she should have found it the first week, in the one document she has handled more than any other, the one that had already lied to her once. The 1961 abandonment map. It is the map that sent her first borehole into solid rock. She had written that off the way every inspector writes it off. Old maps are wrong, datums drift, surveys were sloppy. But she is done extending charity to this file. She takes the 1961 map and the 1948 seam map on cracked linen and the state's brand-new laser survey of the gallery as it actually exists, and she overlays all 3 at her kitchen table with the index cards of the 9 watching her from the corner. The 1948 map and the 2005 survey agree with each other. The 1961 map, the certified map, the legally binding final record of Carrick No. 2, disagrees with both. The East Gallery is drawn 80 feet south of where it runs. 2 crosscuts that exist on the ground are absent from the drawing. The error is not drift, and it is not sloppiness, because everything else on the sheet is meticulous. The map is precise everywhere except the one place precision would matter, the exact panel of ground where 9 coffins were waiting to be found. Her drill missed the gallery in March because the official record of Pennsylvania was engineered in 1961 to make sure any future hole would miss it. The map was not a mistake. The map was the last shovel of dirt on the grave. And the map explains the date. 1961. She pulls the abandonment file itself, the cover documents she has never had reason to read closely. And there is the mechanism, mundane and pitiless. Greaves Coal and Coke, winding down, files formal notice of abandonment for Carrick No. 2 in the spring of 1961. The law is older than any of them. Upon abandonment, the operator files a final certified map of the workings, and the district office signs off on the condition of the ceiling. The state closes the ground, forever, officially, with paperwork. That filing is the trap Walter Greaves built for himself in 1955 and then had to walk into 6 years later. As long as the mine sat temporarily idled, the file stayed open and nobody looked. The moment he abandoned it, the state would touch the mine one last time. Survey, certificate, signatures. A final map drawn from the old workings data would invite a check. A discrepancy would invite a visit. A visit would end everything. The abandonment Greaves needed in order to die, a retired businessman, required the mine to be able to survive one last official glance. So in 1961, before the paperwork, came the visit. Weeks underground. The men found behind their barricade. And here the timeline says something Nora has to stand up and walk away from the table before she can finish thinking it. Whoever timbered through that fall in 1961 was the first human being to see what the 11 days had been. They saw the barricade. They saw whatever the men had left, marks, arrangements, the evidence of waiting. They saw it, and they cleaned the floor, and they bought coffins. Coffins nobody required. Coffins that made the work slower, heavier, riskier. 9 steel cases hauled through a cribbed passage 200 feet down when the men could have been left as they lay behind a repoured seal, and no living soul would ever have known the difference. Every hour of that labor multiplied the chance of discovery, and someone spent the hours anyway. Inside the cover-up, invisible to the state, invisible to the town, somebody had conducted 9 funerals. She thinks of a man standing at the back of St. Cyril's at every one of the family's services for 36 years, attending funerals for men he had already buried himself. The file's last page is the certificate. She has seen 100 like it. Abandonment approved. Condition of ceiling satisfactory. The final map accepted and entered into the permanent record of the Commonwealth. Signed for the operator, W. Greaves. Certified by the Surveyor of Record. And countersigned in the space reserved for the state. The inspection that makes it all legal, the signature that closed Carrick No. 2 against every future question, the same district office, the same man who 6 years earlier had stood at the fall face and read the family's gas number, R. Callum, District Mine Inspector, Department of Mines and Mineral Industries. The state did not miss what happened at Carrick No. 2. The state signed it. To understand why 9 men were sealed alive into Carrick No. 2, you do not need psychology. You need a balance sheet. By October 1955, Greaves Coal and Coke was a company being kept alive by handshakes. The coke market it was born to feed had been dying since the war. The coal under Duncarrick was leased, not owned. The equipment was mortgaged, and Walter Greaves, 61 years old, respected, solvent on paper in the way a man crossing thin ice is dry, was 6 months behind to the land company and further behind than that to the bank in Uniontown. The state's 2005 review, when it finally reconstructs the company's books from the dissolution file, finds the other thing, the reason the roof came down. For at least a year, Carrick No. 2 had been robbing pillars along the main haulage entry, cutting coal out of the support that held the mine's own spine up, because support coal is free coal, already cut to the seam, no development cost. It is the oldest bad bargain in mining. Every ton off those pillars went straight to the thin black line, keeping the company alive, and every ton made the entry above it weaker. On the night of October 28th, the mountain called the Lone. Now run the arithmetic the way Walter Greaves ran it in the lamp house on the second day, with the digging still going. The fall was 200 feet of broken ground, still working. Punching through it safely meant timbering as you went. Engineers later estimate 3 to 6 weeks. Greaves Coal could not fund 3 weeks of anything. A rescue meant borrowed crews, state men on the property around the clock, and lights on every corner of the operation. And the first thing weeks of official attention would find in the exposed guts of the fall itself was the robbed pillars. The proof that the collapse was not the mountain's whim but the company's own hand. Criminal negligence, ruin either way. Against that, a gas pocket at the fall face, real black damp, genuinely there, the kind of dead air a fall always traps. Read out to the families not as what it was, a reading at the fall, but as what it was not. Proof of the atmosphere beyond it. A settlement of $1,100 a man. A grieving town. A sealed portal. And a company that survives to keep 40 surface men in wages. 9 lives against everything. The fan was the part of the arithmetic that could not be admitted even inside the lamp house, because Greaves knew the air beyond the fall was workable. The mine's own circuit told him so. And he knew what miners do when the roof comes down and the air holds. They barricade, they wait, they trust the surface. So the fan stayed on, not mercy. An open option. If the bank came through, if the land company forgave, if some door opened that let the men come out without the pillars coming to light, the air kept the choice alive. The door never opened. What arrived instead on the 2nd of November was Roy Callum's certificate, seal complete, file transmitted to Harrisburg. And once the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania had formally closed Carrick No. 2, a turning fan stopped being an option and became the last piece of evidence that anyone had doubted the tomb. The file closed on the 2nd. The fan ran 6 more days. Nora will never learn what those 6 days were, whether Greaves was arranging money or courage, or simply could not give the order. The record only says what the record always says. On the morning of November 8th, the readings were taken as normal. That afternoon, fan off, complete, initialed DK, in a hand that does not waver on the page, whatever it did in the man. Callum's arithmetic was smaller, and the review concludes, older. His last routine inspection of Carrick No. 2, 5 weeks before the collapse, had certified the haulage entry safe, an entry whose pillars were half gone. Either he missed it, which ends a district inspector's career, or he was paid not to see it, which ends more than that. The dissolution file's creditor schedules contain, among Greaves' small debts, 2 personal notes to R. Callum marked satisfied, and the review lets that fact lie on the table without adjective. By the 2nd day at the portal, Roy Callum was not choosing between truth and a bribe. He was choosing between Greaves' ruin and his own. Every signature after that, the gas concurrence in 1955, the abandonment certificate in 1961, was the same signature, renewing itself. Which leaves the third man, and for the third man, the county has a living witness. Nora's second formal interview with Emil Hruska takes place in April with a state trooper present at Hruska's own request. He wants it on the record, he says, while he is still the one saying it. And on the record, gently, he corrects himself. In March, he had told Nora he was sent home when the rescue was called. That was true, he says, but it was not all of it. He was a fan man's helper. For a week and a half after the seal was poured, he came up the hollow to grease bearings and check belts on machinery the company had not yet pulled. And every one of those mornings, the main fan at Carrick No. 2 was turning. He heard it. The whole patch could hear it. A mine fan is a sound a coal town sleeps inside of. And it went on for days after the funeral masses had already been said. He asked Dale Kettering about it once. The 9th of November, or near it. He remembers because the sound had stopped that week and the quiet was worse. He asked why the fan had run so long past the seal. Dale looked at me, Hruska says, the way you'd look at a man standing on your bad leg, and he said, airing her out for the closure papers. State wants dry readings, and I was 22, and it was Dale Kettering, so that was that. Then Hruska is quiet for a while, and the trooper does not hurry him, and Nora does not either. "I didn't know," he says finally. "I want the record to have it right. I did not know those men were behind that fall breathing. But I knew fans, and I knew that answer was wrong, and I decided it wasn't mine to pull on. I had a wedding coming. I had 40 years in that valley ahead of me." He puts his hands flat on the table, an old man's hands, and delivers the sentence he has clearly built over 50 years of Sundays at St. Cyril's. "You can live a long time next to a thing you decided not to know. It doesn't get smaller." And Kettering, who shut off the air with his own hand and then stood at the back of the church at every funeral for 36 years, Kettering is the one the gallery itself testifies for, because in May, the coroner's office completes its inventory of the effects sealed in with the men and calls Nora to a viewing room with a manila folder and a form to sign. Most of it she expects by now. The rosary was George Toth's. The 2 pocket watches have stopped at different hours, which the examiner notes without comment. The barricade materials show the men organized, disciplined, rationing, carbide, water, the dinner pails pooled. Then the examiner slides a photograph across the table. Item 41. A dinner pail, aluminum, dented, the lid sealed back on tight when it was found, set apart from the pooled supplies, placed on her grandfather's chest, under his folded hands, by whoever laid him in the case. Inside the pail, folded small, kept dry for 50 years, by a lid pressed down with intention. A single sheet of paper. Penciled. Dated November 5, 1955. 8 days after the county buried an empty date on a granite slab. 3 days before the fan stopped. Her grandfather, alive in the dark, had written something down. And Dale Kettering, finding it in 1961, had understood what it was, and had not taken it, and had not destroyed it, and had not dared deliver it. He had sealed it back into the pail and laid it under Andrew Rennick's hands to wait for a future he could not imagine. And the first line of the address on the fold is why Nora has to set the photograph down. For Tommy, her father's name. The state announces its formal review the last week of May. Death certificates for all 9 to be examined for amendment. The abandonment record of Carrick No. 2 reopened, findings to be published. It is everything Nora has carried the file toward since March. She drives to Perryopolis to tell her father about the review and about Item 41, a letter addressed to a 6-year-old in evidence storage, waiting for the only person entitled to open it. Her father listens all the way through. He thanks her in a voice she barely knows. Then he tells her he will not read it, and he will not attend, not the review, not the reburial, none of it. And this time he does not go inside and close the door. This time he stays on the porch, looks at his daughter, and tells her why. Tommy Rennick was 6 years old in October of 1955, and this is what he remembers. He remembers being carried to the portal on his uncle's shoulders the first night, and the lights and his mother's coat. He remembers the funeral mass with no coffin in it. And he remembers, this is the part he has never once said out loud, not to his wife, not to his daughter, not in 50 years. He remembers the sound. The fan. The whole patch slept inside that sound. Every house in Duncarrick, every night of his 6 years of life, the low, steady breath of the pit up the hollow. And after they buried his father, after the Mass, after the slab was ordered, after the grown-ups all agreed on the word gone, the sound was still there. He remembers lying in bed, listening to it, and being comforted by it, the way a child is comforted by anything that hasn't changed. Then, 1 week in November, the sound stopped, and the quiet woke him, and in the morning the grown-ups' faces were wrong. He asked his mother why the pit had gone quiet. She took his hand hard enough to hurt, and never answered, and nobody ever answered, and Tommy Rennick learned what every child of that county learned. Some questions are load-bearing. You don't pull on them. The house stands because you don't. I was 6, and I already knew that fan meant something, he tells Nora on the porch in May. I've had 50 years to not figure out what, and now you're telling me my father was under that sound the whole time, breathing because of it, maybe listening to it the way I was. He looks at the yard for a while. I made my peace with a dead man, he says. I never made any peace with a waiting one. That letter, that's a man who thinks he's coming home. I could live with him dead, Nora. I can't live with him waiting. He is not asking her to stop anymore. He is telling her what it costs. There is a difference, and they both stand in it, and she lets it be. The state's findings are published in September, and they are, in the end, paperwork, which is the only justice this story was ever going to have, and the script of the review is honest about why. Walter Greaves died in 1974. Roy Callum died in 1982. Dale Kettering died in 1991. Greaves' Coal and Coke was dissolved in 1968. There is no estate, no successor, no one to charge, and nothing to seize. The Commonwealth cannot prosecute the dead. What it can do, all it can do, is correct itself. So it does, completely, in the permanent record. The 1955 Accident Bulletin is amended. The collapse attributed to systematic pillar removal along the main haulage entry, the gas determination at the fall face reclassified as not representative of the atmosphere in by. The phrase left where they fell formally struck. 9 death certificates are reissued. Cause, asphyxiation following termination of mechanical ventilation. Date of death, on or after November 8, 1955. The 1961 abandonment map is voided as fraudulent and replaced in the state's files with the true survey. The correction sheet bound, by requirement, directly on top of Callum's certificate so that no one can ever again pull the lie without the truth coming with it. No one goes to jail. Everyone responsible died respected. The review names all 3 men and every mechanism, and then it ends, because there is nothing left for it to reach. Partial justice, fully accounted. The county understands exactly why this is all there is, and understanding it is the difference between an open wound and a scar. The 9 come home on a Saturday in October, 50 years almost to the day. St. Cyril's Churchyard, Duncarrick. 9 graves in 2 rows, dug by a contractor Bosco and son hired, though old Bosco waives what the families later find out he waived. The Andrus brothers are buried side by side, the way they worked. Paul Kessler's grave is the shortest walk from the gate. His mother did not live to see it, but her sister's grandchildren are there. Emil Hruska attends in a press suit, stands through the whole service on his bad legs, and afterward walks the row, touching each headstone once, like a man checking his work. He has already arranged, through Bosco, to be buried in this churchyard himself. He does not explain that to anyone, and does not have to. The stones carry 2 dates, every one of them, October 28, 1955 to November 8, 1955. 11 days apart, carved in granite, on orders the families gave together. The first date the county grieved, and the second date it was never allowed to know about, and between them the whole of the crime, stated the only way stone can state anything. The old slab by the War Memorial stays where it is, 1 date and all. The families voted on that too. It is not wrong exactly. It is evidence. Nora speaks briefly at the service because the families ask her to, and she says the only sentence she has been carrying since the records room in March. The record is not what happened, she tells them. The record is what someone could afford to write down. For 50 years, nobody in this valley could afford the truth. And then the truth turned out to be filed under maintenance. Her father is not there for that part. She has stopped watching the gate by then. He comes at the end. After the crowd thins, a 56-year-old machinist walks up the row with an envelope from the state's evidence unit in his jacket and stands at a grave with his own last name on it, older now than his father ever got to be. Nora stays back. Whatever he decided alone, in the truck, on the drive over. She can see the envelope has already been opened. He reads it out loud anyway. At the stone, because it was addressed and the address has finally come due, and his voice only fails him in the places where anyone's would. Penciled. November 5th, 1955. 8 days in. For Tommy. Son. The roof come down, but we're all right. 9 of us. Good air. Water for a while yet. We hear the fan going, so they know we're here. They'll be through that fall quick as they can. These things take time is all. Mind your mother. Do your numbers. Don't let sister tell you you're slow. You're not slow. When I'm out, we'll go see the Studebaker like I said. I haven't forgot. It's not so dark down here as you'd think, Tom. Your pop. We hear the fan going, so they know we're here. 9 men in the dark, doing the arithmetic of hope with the only number they had, and the number was a lie in both directions. The fan that told them the surface knew they were alive was the same fan that proves forever that the surface knew they were alive. The machine kept both books at once. To the men behind the fall, it said, "Hold on, they're coming." To the record, it said, twice a day, in Dale Kettering's careful hand, "We know, we know, we know." Andrew Rennick died believing the sound. That is the cost, and it does not resolve, and the script does not pretend it resolves. 11 days of trust can be proven now, down to the hour, and never answered. There is no version of the arithmetic where the letter arrives on time. There is only a 56-year-old man at a headstone with 2 dates on it, keeping a promise about a Studebaker to a father half his age, and a daughter watching from the path who did not give her family back what the mine took, because nothing does that. She gave back the true shape of what was taken. In this county, in this story, that is the whole of what winning looks like. Tommy folds the letter along its old folds and puts it back in his jacket, next to his body, where it rode down the hollow. He wasn't slow either, he says, to no one, meaning himself, meaning the 50 years. Then father and daughter walk out through the gate together, past the war memorial, past the slab with the one date that stood for half a century, down the double row of company houses, over ground that is still hollow underneath, in a town that has finally stopped being quiet about why. The fan at Carrick No. 2 ran for 11 days after the collapse, until November 8, 1955. Now it is the record that says so.